During chemistry class, the principal called my name over the intercom. Is Daisy Williams present in school today? My teacher, Mrs. Hara, clicked the intercom button. Yes. The principal's voice echoed, "Lockdown now. This is not a drill." The way he said it made my blood freeze. Mrs. Hara shrieked, "Under the desks! Lights off! Move, move, move!" Nobody said anything, but everyone was thinking the same thing. There was a shooter. I couldn't help but think he was after me. A few minutes later, we heard sirens and then screaming. Mrs. Hara tried to calm us down and told us it might be a misunderstanding, but her hands were shaking. She kept refreshing the email on her laptop like it was giving her live updates. The screaming got louder, and it wasn't just one voice anymore. Multiple people in different parts of the building. Then we heard a loud pop from the hallway, like a metal slamming or something crashing hard. People started crying and whispering that the shooter was right outside, and I believed them. Pia grabbed my hand and her palms were soaked with sweat. I could see Mr. Kit's class across the hall through our door window, lights already off, no movement, just darkness where 20 kids should have been. I looked at our teacher, and for the first time in my life, I saw her cry. She sat with us, hugged the younger kids, and told us it would be okay. But after a while, she got up again and walked back to her laptop. Then we heard it. Footsteps running past our door. Thud, thud, thud. I couldn't help myself. I had to look. 2 paramedics were sprinting down the hall pushing a wheeled stretcher, the kind you see on medical shows when someone's heart stops. "Get away from the door, Daisy," Mrs. Hara whispered, voice shaking. She was scared too. I sat down and immediately texted everyone what I had seen. Even Mrs. Hara stood up slowly and crept to the door to check the window before opening it. That's when it flung open. The principal stood there with an actual cop who had his hand resting on his gun. "You, Daisy, come with us immediately." My worst fear confirmed. The shooter had sent them, or maybe they thought I was involved somehow. Mrs. Hara looked between them and me, confused. "Get your things, honey," Mrs. Hara said. And that scared me more than anything because in 3 years of chemistry class, she'd never called me honey. Every single person was staring at me as I grabbed my backpack with shaking hands. The hallway was complete chaos. More cops than I'd ever seen in one place. I heard a paramedic shout, "We're losing him! Move!" as he flew past us. My classmates were pressed against the door windows in every room watching me get escorted by police like I was a criminal. They steered me to the main office but passed reception into the conference room. The cop finally spoke. "Your dad is here." Well, my parents are divorced and I hadn't seen him since I was 7. So now I was really confused. "Dad?" He grabbed me in a hug so tight I couldn't breathe and his whole body shook against mine. "I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry." My ex-Marine father, who always encouraged me to be stoic and suppress my feelings, was crying his eyes out. "Sorry for what? What's happening? Is there a shooter? Are people dead?" I pulled back to look at him and he held my face in both hands. His hands were freezing. "There's no shooter, baby." That's when he completely broke down. "There was an accident. Your mom was jogging this morning and drunk driver, hit and run. She didn't make it. She's gone." The principal cleared his throat. "We were coming to get you when Mr. Terrence fell down the back stairs. He had severe head trauma, and the emergency response got mixed with..." I stopped listening after that. I stuffed my mouth with the sleeve of my hoodie and screamed as hard as I could. My knees gave out under me, and the pain felt so grounding that I continued to bang my head against the floor. Over and over. "She was going to the bank," Dad whispered, "to deposit money for your senior trip. She wanted to surprise you." Later that night, I was lying in bed staring at nothing when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me look. It was a video attachment. There was my mom jogging down the sidewalk in her pink Nike jacket. Then a car appeared at the end of the street. Mom looked up and saw the car. Then she did something that made my blood turn to ice. She smiled and did that stupid little salute thing. 2 fingers to her forehead, then pointed out. The same dorky greeting she'd done with my dad every morning since their army days. Even after the divorce, she'd joke it was muscle memory. I dropped my phone. That wasn't some drunk driver. Mom knew whoever was in that car. And they knew her too. I kept staring at my phone screen in the dark bedroom, playing the video over and over. Each time I watched it, that salute made my stomach twist harder. Mom's hand went up to her forehead, 2 fingers out, then she pointed forward with this little smile on her face. The 10th time I watched it, I noticed something else. The car slowed down for just a second when she did the salute, like the driver was making sure it was really her. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I couldn't sleep after that, so I grabbed my laptop from my desk and started searching online. First, I typed 2-finger salute military and got tons of results. It was called a scout salute, something veterans did as an inside greeting to recognize each other. The articles said it was like a secret handshake for people who served together. That meant whoever killed Mom was probably military too, probably someone who knew Dad from back when they were both in the army. My brain kept spinning with this information all night. When morning came, I dragged myself to the kitchen where Dad was already making eggs. His hands shook bad when he poured coffee into his mug, and half of it spilled on the counter. He just stared at the puddle for a few seconds before grabbing paper towels. I wanted to show him the video so bad, but something stopped me. Maybe he already knew more than he was saying, or maybe seeing it would completely break him. We ate breakfast without talking, just the sound of forks scraping plates. Going back to the school felt completely unreal. Everyone stared at me in the hallways like I might shatter into pieces. Some kids whispered when I walked past. Others gave me these sad looks that made me want to run away. Mrs. Hara pulled me aside after chemistry class while everyone else filed out. She asked if I needed extensions on my lab reports and homework assignments. I just nodded because I couldn't focus on anything except that video playing in my head over and over. At lunch, Pia found me sitting alone in the corner of the cafeteria. She wrapped me in this huge hug that lasted forever, and I started crying again even though I thought I was out of tears. She didn't ask any questions or try to make me talk. She just sat there with me while I tried to eat the sandwich Dad packed, but it tasted like cardboard in my mouth. Every bite was hard to swallow. I couldn't handle being at the school anymore, so I skipped last period and walked to the street where Mom died. There were flowers everywhere, some fresh and some wilting in the rain that had started falling. People had left cards and notes saying how sorry they were. The rain made everything smell like wet paper and dying plants. I noticed fresh tire marks on the pavement that the rain hadn't washed away yet. They curved slightly, like the car had swerved toward the sidewalk on purpose. That evening back home, I finally worked up the courage to text the unknown number back. My fingers typed, "Who are you?" and I hit send before I could chicken out. 3 dots appeared immediately, showing someone was typing on the other end. The dots stayed there for almost a minute, then disappeared completely. No message came through, but at least I knew someone was watching. Someone who wanted me to know the truth. Dad ordered Chinese takeout for dinner, getting all of Mom's favorite dishes even though she wasn't there to eat them. We sat at the table with way too much food between us. After a while, he started telling me about their first date at a Chinese restaurant near the army base. He said Mom ordered everything too spicy and pretended it didn't burn her mouth because she wanted to look tough. His voice cracked when he talked about how she chugged 3 glasses of milk when she thought he wasn't looking. Then he excused himself to the bathroom and I heard him crying through the door. Later that night, I heard him on the phone in his office. His voice was angry and he kept saying things about keeping quiet and not stirring up trouble. I crept closer to the door to listen better. He mentioned something about old debts and obligations. Then he saw my shadow under the door. He hung up fast and opened the door, telling me it was just insurance company stuff about Mom's policy. But insurance companies don't call at 10 at night, and they definitely don't make Dad sound that scared. The next morning at the school was even worse than the day before. Rumors were flying everywhere about why I got pulled from class during the lockdown. Kids made up crazy stories about what happened. Some said my mom was involved in something illegal. Others said she owed money to bad people. This one kid actually came up to me in the hallway and asked if my mom was the shooter from the lockdown. I had to walk away before I punched him in his stupid face. My fists were clenched so tight my nails left marks in my palms. Study hall was next and I couldn't focus on homework, so I pulled out my phone and started searching. I typed hit and run, plus our town name into Google over and over with different dates. Most results were about other accidents from years ago, but then I found it. A tiny news article from 2 days ago with just 3 sentences about Mom being struck while jogging on Maple Street. The article said police were investigating and asked anyone with information to call the station. That was it. No mention of the driver or the car or anything useful. I opened a new document on my phone and started typing everything I knew. The time was 6:47 a.m. according to the police report Dad showed me. The location was Maple Street near the intersection with Oak. Mom did that salute thing, which meant she knew the driver. Someone sent me that video from an unknown number. Looking at my list made me realize how little I actually had. Just a bunch of questions and one grainy video that proved Mom recognized her killer. After school, I couldn't go straight home, so I walked the long way past First National Bank where Mom was heading that morning. The second I walked in, the teller at the first window looked up and her eyes got watery. She came around the counter and hugged me, which felt weird since I'd never met her before. She told me Mom came in every week and always talked about me. She said Mom was so excited about surprising me with money for the senior trip to Washington, D.C. Mom had been saving for months and was going to deposit the last payment that morning. The teller kept apologizing like it was somehow her fault Mom never made it to the bank. I left feeling worse than before because now I knew Mom died trying to do something nice for me. That night, I was doing homework when my phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. This time, it was just an address with no message. I recognized the street name immediately because it was only 2 blocks from where Mom got hit. My hands started shaking as I stared at the address. Someone wanted me to go there and they'd already shown me they had information about Mom's death. I told Dad I was going to Pia's house to work on a group project. He barely looked up from his laptop where he was filling out insurance forms. I grabbed my bike from the garage and pedaled as fast as I could to the address. It was a small brick house with a perfectly kept lawn and one of those video doorbells pointing at the street. That's when it clicked in my brain. This doorbell camera would have recorded any cars driving past that morning. My legs felt weak as I walked up to the door and rang the bell. An older woman with gray hair pulled back in a bun opened the door and looked at me for a long moment. She asked if I was alone, and when I nodded, she stepped aside to let me in. She said her name was Georgia Rhodes and she'd been expecting me. Her living room had plastic covers on all the furniture and smelled like those plug-in air fresheners. Georgia kept looking out the window through the blinds like she was checking for someone. She told me she'd been too scared to go to the police with what she had. When I asked why, she just shook her head and said, "You never know who's involved in these things." Her hands were shaking as bad as mine when she opened her laptop on the coffee table. She clicked through folders until she found one labeled with the date Mom died. There were dozens of video files from her doorbell camera sorted by time. She clicked on the one from 6:45 a.m., and we both leaned forward to watch. The quality was so much better than the video on my phone. You could see Mom jogging past in her pink jacket looking happy and healthy. Then about 30 seconds later, a gray truck appeared at the edge of the frame. Georgia paused it and zoomed in as much as she could. It was definitely a Ford F-150, and there was something on the back bumper that looked like a sticker, but the image got too fuzzy when she zoomed more. We watched the truck drive past, and then Georgia pulled up another file from 3 minutes later. The same truck came flying back the other way, going way too fast for a residential street. Georgia said she'd seen that truck before lots of mornings around the same time. The driver usually waved at her husband Frank when he was out getting the newspaper. Frank was a veteran too, and they did that same stupid salute thing Mom did. That's when my stomach dropped because this meant the driver was someone from Dad's military world. Someone who knew Mom and Dad from their army days. Georgia made me promise not to tell anyone I'd gotten the videos from her. She burned them onto a flash drive and handed it to me with shaking hands. She said she hoped it helped, but she couldn't get more involved than this. I biked home in the dark with the flash drive in my pocket, feeling like it weighed 100 pounds. The porch light was on, and Dad was sitting on the front steps with his arms crossed. His face was red, and I knew immediately he'd called Pia's house. The second I got close enough, he started yelling about trust and honesty and how he couldn't lose me too. I wanted to tell him everything about Georgia and the video, but something made me keep quiet. We stood there on the porch with him demanding to know where I'd really been, and me refusing to answer. I started walking past him toward the house, but he grabbed my arm and pulled me back. His grip was tight enough to hurt, and I yanked away hard. He followed me inside and slammed the door behind us so hard the picture frames on the wall shook. I'd never seen him this mad before, and it scared me but also made me mad too. He kept asking where I'd been over and over, and I kept my mouth shut, which made him even madder. He started yelling about how I could have been hurt or kidnapped or worse. I yelled back that maybe if he'd been around for the last 10 years, he'd have the right to act like a parent now. That hit him hard, and his face went from red to white in about 2 seconds. He said he was trying to protect me, and I screamed that Mom was dead, so what was the point of protection now? We stood there in the living room just staring at each other and breathing hard. Neither of us said anything about the video or what we both probably knew about who killed Mom. He went to his room and slammed that door too, and I went to mine and did the same. I could hear him on the phone again talking low and angry to someone, but I couldn't make out the words. The next morning we ate breakfast without talking, and he left for work without saying goodbye. I waited until his car was gone, then looked up the number for the police station on my phone. The lady who answered sounded bored until I said I had information about the hit and run on Maple Street. She transferred me right away to someone else who said his name was Detective Alan Holt. His voice sounded tired, like he'd been up all night, but he perked up when I explained I had video footage. He said he could meet me after school at the coffee shop near campus if that worked for me. I agreed and spent the rest of the day barely paying attention in class. Pia kept asking if I was okay, and I just nodded because I couldn't explain everything yet. After the final bell, I walked to the coffee shop and saw a guy in his 30s sitting in the corner booth with a notebook. He stood up when I walked over and shook my hand like I was an adult, which felt weird. He bought me a hot chocolate and we sat down across from each other. I showed him the video on my phone and his eyes got serious as he watched Mom do that salute. He pulled out his notebook and started writing fast while asking me questions about the timestamp and where it came from. I told him about Georgia Rhodes and her doorbell camera and gave him her address and phone number. He wrote it all down and said he'd follow up with her right away. Then he asked if Dad had mentioned anyone who might have had problems with Mom. The way he asked made me think he already suspected something, but wanted to see what I knew. I said Dad hadn't really talked about it much, which was mostly true. He gave me his card and said to call if I remembered anything else or got any more videos. That evening, Dad was in the shower and I could hear the water running upstairs. I went into his office and started looking through the filing cabinet where he kept old stuff. There was a box labeled Army Days that I pulled out and opened on his desk. Inside were tons of photos of Dad with other guys in uniform standing around tanks and trucks. I flipped through them fast looking for anything that might help. Then I found one that made me stop breathing for a second. It was Dad with 4 other guys standing in front of a gray pickup truck. One of the guys looked really familiar, but I couldn't figure out why. I held the photo up to the desk lamp to see better, and that's when I heard the water shut off upstairs. I pulled out my phone and took a quick picture of the photo, just as I heard Dad's footsteps on the stairs. He walked into the office wearing his bathrobe with his hair still wet, and saw me with the box open. He didn't yell or get mad this time. He just looked really tired and sad, and sat down heavy in his desk chair. He looked at the photo in my hand for a long time without saying anything. Then he pointed at the familiar-looking guy and said that was Douglas Butler. They'd served together in Iraq and stayed friends after they got out. He said Doug had been having problems since he got back. The drinking got bad and he lost his job at the warehouse last year. His wife left him and took the kids. I stared at the photo and then at Dad and asked the question we were both thinking. Could Douglas have done this to Mom? Dad wouldn't look at me and just kept saying Doug wouldn't do something like that. But the way he said it sounded like he was trying to convince himself more than me. He said Doug was a good guy who just had some bad luck. I asked if Doug had a gray truck and Dad's silence was all the answer I needed. We sat there in his office not talking while everything started making sense. The next morning I told Dad I felt sick and needed to stay home from the school. He looked at me suspicious but left for work anyway. As soon as his car was gone, I opened my laptop and started searching for Douglas Butler online. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. There was a news article from 6 months ago about a DUI arrest. Douglas Butler, age 38, arrested for driving under the influence and driving with a suspended license. That meant he shouldn't have been driving at all when Mom was killed. I kept searching and found his Facebook page, which was mostly photos of trucks and American flags. I was scrolling through his posts when a message popped up from someone named Maxim Acevedo. He said he was a reporter with the local paper and had seen my posts in the community forum asking about the hit and run. He wanted to meet and compare notes about what we'd each found. My first instinct was to ignore him, but then I thought about Mom and how she deserved justice. I messaged him back and agreed to meet at the library after school tomorrow. The next day after school, I walked into the library and spotted Maxime sitting at a corner table with his laptop open and papers spread everywhere. He looked up when I got close and waved me over, then immediately turned his laptop screen toward me without even saying hello. The screen showed grainy black and white images from what looked like a traffic camera, and I could see the timestamp in the corner showing the exact morning Mom died. Maxime pointed at a blurry shape in one of the frames, and I leaned in closer to see better. It was definitely a pickup truck, gray or maybe silver in the bad lighting, heading down the street that connected to Mom's jogging route. The timestamp read 6:47 a.m., which was 12 minutes before someone called 911 about finding her body. My hands started shaking as I stared at the screen because this was real proof that someone was heading toward her. Maxim clicked to the next image, which showed the same truck from a different angle, and even though the license plate was too blurry to read, I could make out what looked like a veteran sticker on the back window. He pulled out a notebook and showed me his notes, pointing to where he'd written, Douglas Butler, VFW regular, with a bunch of times and dates underneath. According to what Maxime had found out, Douglas had been telling everyone at the VFW hall that he was homesick that morning with the flu. But when Maxime went to Douglas's neighborhood to ask around, the guy who lived next door said he saw Douglas leave his house around 6 a.m. carrying what looked like a toolbox. That was right when Mom would have started her morning jog, and Douglas knew her route because Dad had mentioned it at veteran gatherings when they were still married. I took pictures of everything with my phone while Maxime kept pulling out more papers, including printouts from Douglas's Facebook where he'd been posting angry stuff about people who didn't appreciate veterans and how the system was rigged against guys like him. 3 days later, I worked up the nerve to ask Dad if we could go to the VFW's Friday fish fry, because I said I wanted to understand more about his military friends, and maybe it would help us both heal. Dad looked surprised but agreed, probably thinking it would be good for me to see his support system. We drove there in silence, and I kept checking my phone, ready to text Detective Holt if I needed to. The VFW hall was this old building that smelled like cigarettes and fried food, with American flags everywhere and photos of veterans covering the walls. Dad led me to a table where a bunch of older guys were sitting, and that's when I saw him. Douglas Butler was laughing at something someone said, holding a beer and looking totally normal like he hadn't killed anyone. When he looked up and saw us, his whole face changed, going from happy to something else I couldn't quite read. He stood up real slow and walked over to us, and I could smell the beer on him from 3 feet away. Douglas grabbed my shoulder way too tight, his fingers digging in, and said he was so sorry about my mom and what a tragedy it was. Then he started describing her pink Nike jacket, mentioning the reflective stripes on the sleeves and how she always wore it for her morning runs, details that made my stomach turn because there was only one way he could know that stuff so perfectly. I pulled away from his grip and said I needed to use the bathroom, then practically ran down the hallway past all the military photos and award cases. Once I was locked in the bathroom stall, I pulled out my phone and texted Detective Holt that Douglas was here at the VFW and he'd just described Mom's jacket perfectly. Holt texted back immediately telling me to leave right now, that he was on his way, but I was already walking back toward the main room because I needed to see what would happen next. When I got back to the table, Dad and Douglas were deep in conversation, their heads close together and voices low. Douglas was saying something about obligations and old debts while Dad looked like he might throw up, his face all pale and sweaty. I heard Douglas mention something about a loan and keeping quiet about certain things that happened overseas, and that's when I realized there was some whole history between them I'd never known about. Dad saw me and tried to act normal, but his hands were shaking when he picked up his water glass. About 20 minutes later, Detective Holt walked in wearing jeans and a flannel shirt like he was just another guy coming for fish fry, but I saw how his eyes swept the room and landed on our table. He walked over casual as anything and said hey to Dad like they were old friends, then sat down and started talking about the weather and local sports. But I watched him checking out Douglas's hands for scratches or bruises, and when Douglas put his keys on the table to get his wallet, Holt's eyes locked onto them for a second before looking away. The whole time Douglas kept drinking and getting louder, talking about how unfair life was and how some people got everything while others got screwed over. Later that night, after we got home, I was brushing my teeth when Dad called my name real sharp from downstairs. I ran down and found him holding a piece of paper by the corner like it might burn him, his face white as a sheet. Someone had slipped it under our front door while we were in the kitchen, and it said, "Stop digging or you'll be next," in block letters written with black marker. Dad called 911 immediately, and within 10 minutes there were 2 cops at our house taking photos of the note and asking questions about who might have left it. They decided to post a patrol car outside our house for the night, and the officer said they'd have someone watching the house 24/7 until they figured out who was making threats. I couldn't stop my whole body from shaking, like I was freezing even though the heat was on, and Dad noticed and came to sit next to me on the couch. He stayed in my room that night, pulling my desk chair next to my bed and sitting there in the dark, just like he used to when I was 5 and had bad dreams about monsters. Neither of us said anything about how this was different because the monster was real and knew where we lived. The next morning at the school, I was falling asleep in first period when the office called me down, and I found Amy Lancaster, the school counselor, waiting for me with this concerned look on her face. She brought me into her office, which had all these motivational posters and a box of tissues on every surface, then sat down across from me with a yellow legal pad. She said she'd heard about what happened to my mom and wanted to check in about how I was managing school with everything going on. Amy helped me make a list of all my missing assignments and which teachers I needed to talk to about extensions, then suggested I try writing down facts in one column and feelings in another column to help keep myself grounded when everything felt overwhelming. She gave me this special notebook for it and said I could come see her anytime I needed to talk or just needed a quiet place to sit. I was scrolling through my phone during lunch when I saw Maxime's article pop up on the local news site with the headline, "Asking Questions About Recent Traffic Incidents in Our Area." He didn't name Mom specifically, but anyone who knew about the accident would recognize the details like the time and location and the fact that no driver had been arrested yet. The comments section was already going crazy with people sharing their own stories about accidents that seemed suspicious. And one woman wrote that her brother got hit by someone who supposedly fell asleep at the wheel, but witnesses saw the driver speed up right before impact. I screenshot everything and was about to text Dad when my phone rang and Detective Holt's name showed up on the screen. He told me they were making progress and had just gotten approval for warrants to pull phone records and check local body shops for any gray trucks that came in for repairs after Mom died. His voice sounded different this time, more confident, and he mentioned that the doorbell footage Georgia gave them was really helpful because it showed clear details about the truck's make and model. After school, I went straight home instead of staying for track practice and found Dad's car already in the driveway, which was weird since he never got home before 6. I walked in and found him sitting at Mom's desk, going through all her papers and folders, with this look on his face like he was about to throw up. He held up Mom's planner and pointed to an entry from 2 days before she died that said DB, loan discussion 3 p.m., written in her neat handwriting. DB had to be Douglas Butler, and now we knew for sure they'd been in contact right before she died. Dad's hands were shaking when he showed me more pages where Mom had written notes about the Veteran Emergency Fund she'd been helping coordinate, and how Douglas kept asking for money for his bills and getting mad when the committee voted no. She'd written, "Doug getting aggressive, need to document," in the margin of one page, and underlined it twice. We sat there for a while just staring at all this evidence that Mom knew Douglas was becoming a problem, but didn't know how dangerous he really was. Dad said we should take everything to Detective Holt, but first he wanted to check out the body shop Maxim had mentioned in his article. We drove across town to this sketchy-looking place with a bunch of damaged cars in the lot, and when we walked in, the owner immediately looked nervous like he knew why we were there. Dad asked about gray pickups that might have come in recently, and the guy started saying he couldn't discuss customer work because of privacy, but his eyes kept flicking to a clipboard on his desk where I could clearly see Douglas's name at the top of a work order. The owner kept wiping his hands on his coveralls and saying we'd need a warrant to see any records, but the whole time he was backing away from us like he was scared. We left without pushing it, but I took a photo of the license plate of a gray truck parked around back that had fresh paint on the front bumper. That night, Detective Holt texted both me and Dad saying they'd confirmed Douglas's truck was at that body shop 2 days after Mom died, getting a front bumper replacement and new paint job. He said the investigation was officially focused on Douglas now, and they were building a solid case but needed a few more days to get everything lined up. The memorial service was that weekend, and I spent the whole morning throwing up because I couldn't handle the idea of standing in front of everyone talking about Mom when we knew someone had murdered her. We got to the funeral home early to set up the photo boards and flower arrangements when I saw Douglas walk in wearing a black suit that looked brand new. My skin started crawling and I grabbed Dad's arm so tight he winced, but he just whispered that we had to act normal and not let Douglas know we were onto him. Douglas came over and hugged us both, saying how sorry he was, and the whole time I was staring at his boots, which had little specks of paint overspray on them, like he'd been standing too close when someone was spray painting. During the service, I watched him walk up to the guest book and write something while everyone else was listening to the pastor talk about Mom's life. After everyone left for the reception, I went back and looked at what he wrote, and there it was in his messy handwriting. Just 2 words, "Forgive me," which made my stomach drop, because that wasn't what innocent people write at funerals. At the reception, Georgia found me by the food table and pulled me aside to whisper that she'd given the police more footage from the night before Mom died. Her camera had caught Douglas's truck driving past her house 3 times between midnight and 2 in the morning, like he was checking out the neighborhood and planning his route. She said the detective told her this was really important, because it showed premeditation, and would help prove this wasn't just some accident or spur-of-the-moment thing. I was sitting in my room that night trying to do homework when Detective Holt called and said they were arresting Douglas first thing in the morning. He wanted us to know ahead of time because Douglas might try to contact us tonight, and we should call 911 immediately if he showed up at our house. Dad and I stayed up watching TV, but neither of us was really watching, just waiting for something bad to happen. Around midnight, Dad told me to go to bed, but I couldn't sleep, so I just laid there checking my phone every few minutes. At exactly 2:14 a.m., Dad's phone started ringing on the kitchen counter and we both jumped up at the same time. The screen showed Douglas's name and Dad hit speaker while grabbing his old cassette recorder from the junk drawer. Douglas was slurring his words bad, going on about how it was an accident and he never meant for it to happen. He kept saying Mom's name over and over, and then something about the loan and how she shouldn't have said no. I was already texting Detective Holt everything Douglas was saying while Dad just let him ramble. Douglas started crying and said he just wanted to scare her, make her understand how desperate he was, but the truck went too fast and he couldn't stop in time. Dad's face went completely white, but he kept the recorder going while Douglas basically confessed to everything, including how he'd been watching Mom's jogging route for weeks. The call lasted 17 minutes before Douglas passed out or hung up, and Dad immediately called Detective Holt, who said units were already on their way to pick Douglas up. By 6 a.m., the arrest was all over the local news website with Douglas's mugshot showing him looking rough with bloodshot eyes and gray stubble. At the school, everyone was staring at me and whispering because the article mentioned me and Dad by name as the victim's family. Some kids came up and hugged me or said they were sorry, but others, especially the ones whose dads were in the VFW with Douglas, walked right past me without making eye contact. Jake Tommy actually bumped into me on purpose and muttered something about snitches, which made Pia step between us ready to fight. 3 days later, we got a call from the DA's office asking us to come in for a meeting about the charges. The prosecutor was this older woman with gray hair pulled back tight, who spread out all these papers showing Douglas's record, including 2 prior DUIs and the suspended license. She explained they were charging him with vehicular manslaughter, leaving the scene of a fatal accident, driving on a suspended license, and some other stuff that could add up to 25 years. Dad asked if that meant a trial, and she said probably not because Douglas's lawyer was already asking about plea deals. Sure enough, the next morning, Douglas's lawyer called our house trying to set up a meeting. Dad put him on speaker, and the guy immediately started talking about how this was all a terrible accident, and Douglas was suffering from PTSD and substance abuse issues. He wanted to plead to a lesser charge of involuntary manslaughter and get maybe 5 years with treatment programs. But I grabbed the phone and told him about the video showing Douglas aimed right at Mom. The lawyer got quiet and said he'd have to review that evidence, but still thought we could work something out, which made me so mad, I threw the phone across the room. A week later, Dad got a letter from the VFW saying some members had started a legal defense fund for Douglas, since he was a veteran in crisis, who deserved support, not abandonment. Dad sat at the kitchen table for an hour writing a response explaining why he couldn't stay silent about his friend murdering his ex-wife, even if it meant losing his whole community. He mailed it, but also posted it on Facebook, which caused this huge fight with people taking sides and calling each other traitors. 2 weeks into all the legal stuff, Douglas's wife Linda showed up at our door with a box of papers. She looked exhausted and said she'd filed for divorce and wanted us to know the truth about what Douglas had been saying before Mom died. She showed us these text messages where Douglas ranted about people who betrayed him, and Mom's name came up over and over, calling her self-righteous and saying she needed to be taught a lesson. Linda also had bar receipts showing Douglas drinking every night for months, and recordings from their Ring doorbell of him coming home drunk, talking about getting revenge on everyone who wronged him. We gave everything to Detective Holt, who said it would really help the case. The next weekend, I biked over to George's house to thank her for being brave enough to share that footage. She made chamomile tea, and we sat on her porch not talking much, but it felt good being with someone else who did the right thing even though it was scary. She told me her husband was mad at her for getting involved, but she couldn't live with herself if she'd stayed quiet. Dad found this grief support group at the community center and convinced me to go, even though I didn't want to talk about feelings with strangers. The first few sessions, we just sat there listening to other people share their stories, but on the drives there and back, Dad started telling me things about Mom I never knew, like how she used to write poetry and wanted to be a teacher before joining the army, and how she cried for 3 days when she found out she was pregnant with me, because she was so happy. After 6 weeks of legal back and forth, the DA called with news that Douglas agreed to plead guilty to vehicular homicide. 15 years with no chance of early parole, plus he had to pay restitution even though everyone knew he was broke. Dad and I had to go to court for the plea hearing where Douglas stood in an orange jumpsuit and actually admitted to killing Mom on purpose because he was angry about the loan denial. Hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way that hit me so hard I had to run to the bathroom and throw up. School got easier after the plea deal was public and the drama died down. Pia stayed by my side through everything, and even Mrs. Hara started checking on me between classes, calling me honey like it was totally normal now, which actually made me feel better somehow. Dad showed up at my door the next Saturday morning with cardboard boxes and said we needed to go through Mom's office at the house. We drove there in silence, and I hadn't been back since that morning when she left for her jog. Her coffee mug still sat on the counter with a ring of dried coffee at the bottom. Dad started with her desk drawers while I tackled the closet full of her work clothes that still smelled like her perfume. We packed most of the blazers and dresses for donation, but when I found her old army uniforms hanging in the back, Dad grabbed them and held them against his chest. Behind the uniforms, I found a shoebox full of letters with our names on them. Never mailed, all dated from different years after the divorce. Dad read his first one and had to sit down on the floor. Mine talked about how proud she was of me, and how she wished things could have been different with Dad, but she never stopped hoping we'd all find our way back to each other somehow. 3 months passed before I could even think about running again. But one morning, I put on Mom's pink Nike jacket and laced up my shoes. The route she took every morning started at our house and went down to the park where the community had installed a memorial bench with her name on it. My legs shook the whole first mile, but when I reached the bench and sat down, I didn't cry for the first time since everything happened. Detective Holt mailed us the final case file with all the evidence they'd collected, and it was thicker than a phone book. The financial records showed Douglas owed over $80,000 between gambling debts and failed business ventures. He'd applied to the Veteran Emergency Fund Mom managed 6 times and got denied every time because he never provided proper documentation. The detective highlighted one email where Douglas wrote that Mom was ruining his life by being so strict about the rules, and someone needed to teach her that actions have consequences. Dad started showing up at my school stuff after that. First just my chemistry presentation, then the spring concert where I played clarinet, then even the stupid bake sale fundraiser. He met Pia properly at the concert, and she told him about how we'd been friends since middle school, and how Mom used to drive us to the mall every Friday. The college acceptance letters started coming in April, and I got into 3 schools, but the one that mattered came on Mom's birthday. The scholarship committee wrote that my essay about seeking justice while processing grief showed unusual maturity, and they were offering me a full ride. Georgia Rhodes called that same week to invite us for Sunday dinner, and it became this regular thing where we'd go over and she'd make pot roast while her husband talked to Dad about their service years. She told me once while we were washing dishes that testifying about the video footage was the scariest thing she'd ever done, but watching us fight for the truth made her realize some things are worth being scared for. At graduation, I pinned Mom's Army insignia on my gown right above my Honor Society cords, and when they called my name, Dad stood up in the bleachers and cheered so loud everyone turned to look. He was crying and clapping at the same time and didn't care who saw him anymore. 6 months had passed since that morning when everything changed and I was sitting on Mom's memorial bench after my morning jog. I wasn't perfect, and some days still hurt so bad I couldn't get out of bed, but I was actually okay. Really okay. Not just pretending. Mom's death had torn everything apart, but somehow in all that destruction, Dad and I found each other again and built something new from the pieces. The truth about Douglas came out and justice happened even if it couldn't bring her back. I knew Mom would have wanted exactly this, for us to find our way back to being a family even if she couldn't be there to see it. Time to close the book on this journey, folks. Appreciate you letting me drop my clever quips and observations along the way today. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. Love reading all your comments.